The third hadn't come from either of us. I looked across the hall and saw Christian watching us. I separated from Adrian just as the bell rang. The sounds of students pouring out of classrooms rumbled through the hallway. "Now I can see Lissa," said Adrian happily. "Rose, will you come with me to the feeders?" asked Christian. He spoke in a flat tone, and his expression was unreadable. "I'm not guarding you today." "Yeah, well, I miss your charming company." I told Adrian goodbye and cut through the cafeteria with Christian. "What's up?" I asked. "You tell me," he said. "You were the one about ready to start making out with Adrian." "It was an experiment," I said. "It was part of my therapy." "What the hell kind of therapy are you in?" We reached the feeders room. Somehow, despite him getting out of class early, there were still a few people ahead of us in line. "Why do you care?" I asked him. "You should be happy. It means he isn't moving in on Lissa." "He could be moving in on both of you." "What are you, my big brother now?" "Annoyed," he said. "That's what I am." I looked beyond him and saw Jessie and Ralph enter. "Well, keep it to yourself. Our good friends will overhear." Jessie, however, was too busy to hear, because he was arguing with the feeding coordinator. "I don't have time to wait," he told her. "I've got to be somewhere." She pointed to us and the others in line. "These people are ahead of you." Jessie met her eyes and smiled. "You can make an exception this time." "Yeah, he's in a hurry," added Ralph in a voice I'd never heard him use before. It was smooth and less grating than usual. "Just write his name down at the top of the list." The coordinator looked like she was going to tell them off, but then a funny, distracted look came over her face. She glanced at her clipboard and wrote something. A few seconds after she looked away, her head jerked up again, eyes sharp once more. She frowned. "What was I doing?" "You were signing me up," said Jessie. He pointed at the board. "See?" She looked down, startled. "Why is your name first? Didn't you just get here?" "We were here earlier and checked in. You told us it was okay." She looked down again, clearly puzzled. She didn't remember them coming earlier, because they hadn't. But she apparently couldn't figure out why Jessie's name was at the top now. A moment later, she shrugged and must have decided it wasn't worth overthinking. "Stand with the others. I'll call you next." As soon as Jessie and Ralph came near us, I turned on them. "You just used compulsion on her," I hissed. Jessie looked panicked for a fraction of a second. Then his normal swagger took over. "Whatever. I just convinced her, that's all." "What? Are you going to try to tell on me or something?" "Nothing to tell," scoffed Christian. "That was the worst compulsion I've ever seen." "Like you've seen compulsion," said Ralph. "Plenty," said Christian. "From people prettier than you. Of course, maybe that's part of why yours isn't as good." Ralph seemed highly offended at not being considered pretty, but Jessie just nudged him and started to turn away. Forget him. He had his chance. His chance at... I remembered how Brandon had attempted weak compulsion when trying to convince me his bruises were nothing. Jill had said that Brett Ozera actually had convinced a teacher that his were nothing. The teacher had dropped the matter, much to Jill's surprise. Brett must have used compulsion. Light bulbs went off in different parts of my brain. The connections were all around me. The problem was, I couldn't untangle the wires quite yet. "That's what this is about, isn't it? Your stupid mana and its need to beat up on people. It's got something to do with compulsion." I didn't understand how it all fit together, but the surprised look on Jesse's face told me I was onto something, even though he said, "You don't know what you're talking about." I pushed forward, hoping some blind hits would make him mad and say something he wasn't supposed to. What's the point? Does it give you guys some kind of power trip to do these little tricks? That's all they are, you know. You seriously don't know the first thing about compulsion. I've seen compulsion that would make you do handstands and throw yourself out a window. "We're learning more than you can even imagine," said Jesse. "And when I find out who told—" He didn't have a chance to finish his threat because he was called over to the feeder just then. He and Ralph stalked away, and Christian immediately turned to me. "What's going on? What's Mana?" I gave him a hasty recap of Adrian's explanation. That's what they wanted you to join. They must secretly be practicing compulsion. Adrian said these groups are always royals who have some plan to change and control things in dangerous times. They must think compulsion is the answer. It's what they meant when they told you they had ways to help you get what you wanted. If they knew how crappy your compulsion was, they probably wouldn't have asked. He scowled, not liking me reminding him of the one time he'd attempted, and failed, to compel someone at the ski lodge. "So where's the beating people up part come in?" "That's the mystery," I said. Christian was summoned over to feed just then, and I put my theories on hold until I could get more info and take action. I noticed which feeder we were being led to. "Is that Alice again? How do you always get her? Do you request her?" "No, but I think some people specifically unrequest her." Alice was happy to see us, as always. "Rose, are you still keeping us safe?" "I will if they'll let me," I told her. "Don't be too hasty," she warned. "Conserve your strength. If you're too eager to fight the undead, you may find yourselves joining them. Then you'd never see us again, and we'd be very sad." "Yes," said Christian. "I'd cry into my pillow every night." I resisted the urge to kick him. "Well, I couldn't visit if I was Strigoi, yeah, but hopefully I'd just die a normal death. Then I could come see you as a ghost." How sad, I thought, that I was now making jokes about the very thing that was freaking me out lately. Alice found no amusement in it whatsoever. She shook her head. "No, you wouldn't. The wards would keep you out." "The wards only keep Strigoi out," I reminded her gently. A defiant look replaced her scattered one. "The wards keep anything that isn't alive out, dead or undead." "Now you've done it," said Christian. "The wards don't keep ghosts out," I said. "I've seen them." Considering Alice's own instability, I didn't mind discussing mine with her. In fact, it was kind of refreshing to talk about this stuff with someone who wouldn't judge me. Indeed, she treated this as perfectly normal conversation. "If you've seen ghosts, then we're not safe anymore." "I told you last time, the security's too good." "Maybe someone made a mistake," she argued, sounding remarkably coherent. "Maybe someone missed something. Wards are made of magic. Magic is alive. Ghosts can't cross them for the same reason as Strigoi. They aren't alive. If you saw a ghost, the wards have failed." She paused. "Or you're crazy." Christian laughed out loud. "There you go, Rose, straight from the source." I shot him a glare. He smiled at Alice. "In Rose's defense, though, I think she's right about the wards. The school checks them all the time. The only place guarded better than here is the royal court, and both places are overflowing with guardians. Stop being so paranoid." He fed, and I glanced away. I should have known better than to listen to Alice. She was hardly a reputable source of information, even if she'd been around for a while. And yet, her weird logic did make sense. If wards kept Strigoi out, why not ghosts? True, Strigoi were the dead who had come back to walk the earth, but her point was sound. All of them were dead. But Christian and I were right, too. The wards around the school were solid. It took a lot of power to lay wards. Not every Moroi home could have them, but places like schools and the royal court had theirs maintained diligently. The royal court. I'd had no ghostly encounters whatsoever while we were there. Yet, that had been incredibly stressful. If my sightings were stress-induced, wouldn't the court and encounters with Victor and the Queen have provided great opportunities for them to occur? The fact that I'd seen nothing seemed to negate the PTSD theory. I hadn't seen ghosts until we'd landed at the Martinville airport, which didn't have wards. I nearly gasped. The court had strong wards. I'd seen no ghosts. The airport, which was part of the human world, had no wards. I'd been bombarded with ghosts there. I'd also seen flashes of them in the plane, which was unwarded when we were in the air. I looked over at Alice and Christian. They were just about finished. Could she be right? Did wards keep out ghosts? And if so, what was going on with the school? If the wards were intact, I should see nothing, just like at court. If the wards were broken, I should be overrun, just like at the airport. Instead, the academy was somewhere in the middle. I had sightings only occasionally. It didn't make sense. The only thing I knew for sure was that if something was going wrong with the school's wards, then I wasn't the only one in danger. Chapter 21. I could hardly wait for my day to end. I'd promised Lissa I'd hang out with her and the others after school. It should have been fun, but the minutes dragged by. I was too restless. When curfew came around, I split off from them and ran back to my dorm. I asked the woman at the front desk if she could call up to Dimitri's room. Off limits to students, because I had an urgent question for him. She had just picked up the phone when Celeste walked past. "He's not there," she told me. She had a large bruise on the side of her face. Some novice had gotten the better of her. Some novice who wasn't me. "I think he was going to the chapel. You'll have to see him tomorrow. You can't be there and back before curfew comes." I nodded meekly and acted like I was heading for the student wing. Instead, as soon as I was out of sight, I headed back outside again and ran to the chapel. She was right. I wasn't going to make curfew. But hopefully, Dimitri could make sure I got back without getting in trouble. The chapel's doors were unlocked when I reached them. I walked in and saw all the candles lit, making all the gold ornaments in the room sparkle. The priest must still be working. But when I stepped inside the sanctuary, he wasn't there. Dimitri was, however. He sat in the last pew. He wasn't praying or kneeling or anything. He just sat there, looking quite relaxed. Although he wasn't a practicing member of the church, he told me he often found peace there. It gave him a chance to think about his life and the deeds he'd done. I always thought he looked good. But just then, something about him nearly made me come to a standstill. Maybe it was because of the background, all the polished wood and colorful icons of saints. Maybe it was just the way the candlelight shone on his dark hair. Maybe it was just because he looked unguarded, almost vulnerable. He was normally so wound up, so on edge, but even he needed the occasional moment of rest. He seemed to glow in my eyes, kind of in the way Lissa always did. His normal tension returned when he heard me come in. "Rose, is everything okay?" He started to stand, and I motioned him down as I slid into the spot beside him. The faint smell of incense lingered in the air. "Yeah, well, kind of. No breakdowns, if that's what you're worried about. I just had a question, or, well, a theory." I explained the conversation with Alice and what I'd deduced from it. He listened patiently, expression thoughtful. "I know Alice. I'm not sure she's credible," he said when I finished. It was similar to what he'd said about Victor. "I know, I thought the same thing, but a lot of it makes sense." "Not quite. As you pointed out, why are your visions so irregular here? That doesn't go along with the ward theory. You should feel like you did on the plane." "What if the wards are just weak?" I asked. He shook his head. "That's impossible. Wards take months to wear down. New ones are put in place here every 2 weeks." "That often?" I asked, unable to hide my disappointment. I'd known maintenance was frequent, but not that frequent. Alice's theory had almost provided a sound explanation, one that didn't involve me being insane. "Maybe they're getting staked," I suggested. "By humans or something, like we saw before." "Guardians walk the grounds a few times a day. If there was a stake in the borders of campus, we'd notice." I sighed. Dmitri moved his hand over mine, and I flinched. He didn't remove it, though, and as he did so frequently, guessed my thoughts. "You thought if she was right, it would explain everything." I nodded. "I don't want to be crazy." "You aren't crazy. But you don't believe I'm really seeing ghosts?" He glanced away, his eyes staring at the flickering of candles on the altar. "I don't know. I'm still trying to keep an open mind, and being stressed isn't the same as being crazy." "I know," I admitted, still very conscious of how warm his hand was. I shouldn't have been thinking about things like that in church. But, well, there's something else. I told him then about Anna possibly catching Vladimir's insanity. I also explained Adrian's aura observations. He turned his gaze back on me, expression speculative. "Have you told anyone else about this? Lissa? Your counselor?" "No," I said in a small voice, unable to meet his eyes. "I was afraid of what they'd think." He squeezed my hand. "You have to stop this. You aren't afraid of throwing yourself in the path of danger, but you're terrified of letting anyone in." I don't know," I said, looking up at him. "I guess." "Then why'd you tell me?" I smiled. "Because you told me I should trust people. I trust you." "You don't trust Lissa?" My smile faltered. "I trust her absolutely, but I don't want to tell her things that'll make her worry. I guess it's a way of protecting her, just like keeping Strigoi away." "She's stronger than you think," he said, "and she would go out of her way to help you." "So what? You want me to confide in her and not you?" "No, I want you to confide in both of us. I think it'd be good for you. Does what happened to Anna bother you?" "No." I looked away again. "It scares me." I think the admission stunned both of us. I certainly hadn't expected to say it. We both froze for a moment, and then Dmitri wrapped his arms around me and pulled me to his chest. A sob built up in me as I rested my cheek against the leather of his coat and heard the steady beating of his heart. "I don't want to be like that," I told him. "I want to be like everyone else. I want my mind to be normal. Normal by Rose standards, I mean. I don't want to lose control. I don't want to be like Anna and kill myself. I love being alive. I'd die to save my friends, but I hope it doesn't happen. I hope we all live long, happy lives. Like Lissa said, one big happy family. There's so much I want to do, but I'm so scared. Scared that I'll be like her. I'm afraid I won't be able to stop it. He held me tighter. It's not going to happen, he murmured. You're wild and impulsive, but at the end of the day, you're one of the strongest people I know. Even if you are the same as Anna, and I don't think you are, you two won't share the same fate. It was funny. I'd often told Lissa the same thing about her and Vladimir. She'd always had a hard time believing it, and now I understood. Giving advice was a lot harder than following it. You're also missing something, he continued, running a hand over my hair. If you are in danger from Lissa's magic, then at least you understand why. She can stop using her magic, and that'll be the end of it. I pulled away slightly so I could look at him. Hastily, I ran my hand over my eyes in case any tears had escaped. But can I ask her to do that? I said. I've felt how it makes her feel. I don't know if I can take that away from her. He regarded me with surprise. Even at the cost of your own life? Vladimir did great things. So could she. Besides, they come first, right? Not always. I stared. I'd had "they come first" drilled into me since I was a child. It was what all guardians believed. Only the Dampiers who'd run away from their duty didn't subscribe to that. What he said was almost like treason. Sometimes, Rose, you have to know when to put yourself first. I shook my head. Not with Lissa. I might as well have been with Deirdre or Ambrose again. Why was everyone suddenly challenging something I'd held as absolute truth my entire life? She's your friend. She'll understand. To make his point, he reached forward and tugged at the Chotki peeking out underneath my sleeve, his fingertips brushing my wrist. It's more than that, I said. I pointed to the cross. If anything, this proves it. I'm bound to her, to protect the Dragomirs at all costs. I know, but... He didn't finish. And honestly, what could he have said? This was becoming an old argument, one without solution. I need to get back, I said abruptly. It's past curfew. A wry smile crossed Dimitri's face. And you need me to get you back, or you'll get in trouble. Well, yeah, I was kind of hoping. We heard some rustling near the door of the sanctuary, and Father Andrew walked in, which definitely ended our session. He was getting ready to shut down the chapel. Dimitri thanked him, and then the two of us headed back to the Dampier dorm. Neither of us spoke along the way, but it was a comfortable silence. It was weird, but since his outburst outside the med clinic, I felt something had intensified between us, as impossible as that seemed. Dimitri got me past the woman at the front desk, and just as I was about to head off for my wing, a guardian named Yuri walked by. Dimitri called to him. You've been working with security, haven't you? When was the last time they laid new wards? Yuri considered. Couple days ago. Why? Dimitri gave me a meaningful look. Just curious. I nodded to Dimitri to show that I understood his point, and then I went off to bed. After that, the next week or so played out in a repetitive pattern. I followed Christian for 3 days a week, had my counseling sessions, and trained with Dimitri. During those times, I could see the concern on Dimitri's face. He always asked how I was, but didn't push me to talk about anything I didn't want to. Mostly, it was all physical training, which I liked since it didn't require too much ruminating. Best of all, I didn't see Mason during this time. I also didn't witness any attacks, of either the Mana type or the Guardian type. We were in full throes of the field experience, and every other novice in my class was having regular fights. The tests grew intricate and more difficult, and everyone had to stay on their toes. Eddie seemed to have to defend Lissa every other day from some guardian playing Strigoi, but it never happened when I was around. In fact, no attacks at all happened to anyone when I was around. After a while, I began to get the idea. They were going soft on me. They were worried I couldn't handle it. They might as well have cut me from the field experience after all, I grumbled to Christian one evening. I'm not doing anything. Yeah, but if you still pass, why worry about it? I mean, do you actually want to get into a fight every day? He then rolled his eyes. Never mind, of course you do. You don't understand, I told him. This job isn't about taking the easy way out. I want to prove what I can do. To them and to myself. You can never get enough practice. I mean, Lissa's life is at stake. And also possibly my future with her. I'd worried before they might decide to replace me, and that was before they thought I was nuts. It was nearly curfew time, and I was dropping him off for the night. He shook his head. Rose, I don't know if you're crazy or not, but I'm actually starting to think you might be the best guardian, or soon-to-be guardian, out there. Did you just give me a serious compliment? I asked. He turned his back on me and headed inside his dorm. Good night. My life was still in chaos, but I couldn't help a small grin as I headed back toward my dorm. The walk always made me nervous, since I now lived in perpetual fear of seeing Mason. There were other people scurrying back before curfew too, though, and he mostly tended to show up when I was alone, either because he preferred the privacy or because he really was a figment of my imagination. Talking about Lissa reminded me that I'd hardly seen her today. Comfortable and content, I let my mind slip into hers while my body continued its walk. She was in the library, hurriedly trying to finish up some notes. Eddie stood near her, glancing around. Better hurry up, he said teasingly. She's making another round. Almost done, Lissa said, scrawling a few more words. She shut the textbook just as the librarian came by and told them they had to leave now. With a sigh of relief, Lissa stuffed her papers into her bag and followed Eddie out. He picked it up and carried it over his shoulder as they went. You don't have to do that, she said. You aren't my valet. You can have it back as soon as you fix that. He gestured to where she was tangled up in her coat. She'd shoved it on while trying to get out of the library on time. She laughed at her own disorderliness and adjusted the inside-out sleeve. Thanks, she said when he handed it back. No problem. Lissa liked Eddie, though not in a romantic kind of way. She just thought he was nice. He did things like that all the time, helping her out while still doing an excellent job in his duties. His motives weren't romantic either. He was just one of those rare guys who could be both a gentleman and a badass. She had plans for him. Have you ever thought about asking Rose out? What? He asked. What? I thought. You guys just have so much in common, she said, trying to sound casual. Inside, she was excited. She thought this was the best idea in the world. For me, it was one of those moments where being in her mind was being too close to her. I would rather have been standing beside her so I could shake some sense into her. She's just my friend, he laughed, his face taking on kind of a cute shyness. And I don't think we'd actually be that compatible. Besides, his expression fell. I could never go out with Mason's girlfriend. Lissa started to say what I always told her, that I hadn't actually been Mason's girlfriend. Wisely, she instead chose to let Eddie keep believing the best. Everyone has to move on sometime. It hasn't been that long, not really, just over a month, and it's not really something you get over quickly. His eyes had a sad, faraway look that hurt both Lissa and me. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to make it sound like something small. What you saw, I know it was horrible. You know what's weird? I actually don't remember much of it. And that's what's horrible. I was so drugged out that I had no idea what was going on. I hate that. You have no idea. Being helpless like that, it's the worst thing in the world. I felt the same way. I think it was a guardian thing. Eddie and I had never talked about it, though. We'd never even talked about Spokane much. It wasn't your fault, Lissa told him. Strigoi endorphins are strong. You couldn't have fought against them. I should have tried harder, he countered, holding the door to her dorm open. If I'd been even a little more conscious, I don't know, Mason might still be alive. Eddie and I realized, should both have been in therapy as soon as we got back from winter break. I finally understood why everyone said blaming myself for Mason's death was irrational. Eddie and I were both holding ourselves responsible for things that had been beyond our control. We were torturing ourselves with guilt we didn't deserve. Hey, Lissa, come here. The serious subject was put on hold as Jessie and Ralph waved at her from across the dorm's lobby. My defenses immediately went up. So did hers. She didn't like them any better than I did. What's this about? Eddie asked warily. I don't know, she muttered, walking over. I hope it's fast. Jessie gave her a dazzling smile, one that I once found really hot. Now I saw it for the fake piece of crap it was. How's it going? He asked. It's going tired, she replied. I need to get to bed. What's up? Jessie looked over at Eddie. Would you give us a little privacy? Eddie looked at Lissa. She nodded, and Eddie backed up enough to be out of earshot, but still watch her. When he was gone, Jessie said, We have an invitation for you. To what, a party? Kind of. It's a group. Ralph wasn't so good with words, and Jessie took over again. More than a group. It's only for elite people. He gestured around. You, and me, and Ralph. We're not like a lot of other Moroi. We're not even like a lot of other royals. We have concerns and issues that we need to take care of. I thought it was funny that he'd include Ralph. Ralph's royalty came from his mother, Avoda, so he didn't even carry one of the royal names, even if he technically had the blood. It sounds kind of snobby, she said. No offense. Thanks for the offer, though. That was Lissa, always polite, even to creeps like these. You don't understand. We aren't just sitting around. We're working to get things done. He hesitated and then spoke more softly. Working on ways to get our voices out there, to make people see our way no matter what. Lissa gave an uncomfortable laugh. Sounds like compulsion. So? I couldn't see her face, but I could feel her working hard to keep it as straight as possible. Are you out of your mind? Compulsion's forbidden. It's wrong. Only to some people, and apparently not you since you're pretty good at it. She stiffened. Why would you think that? Because someone, a couple people actually, hinted at it. People? I tried to remember what Christian and I had said in the feeder room. We'd never mentioned her by name, though both of us had bragged about having seen someone use compulsion. And apparently, Jessie had noticed other things about her. Besides, it's actually kind of obvious. People love you. You've gotten out of so much trouble, and I finally figured out why. You've been working people over this whole time. I was watching you in class the other day when you convinced Mr. Hill to let Christian work with you on that project. He never would have let anyone else do that. I'd been with them in class that day. Lissa actually had used compulsion on her teacher to get help for Christian. She'd been so caught up in her pleas that she'd compelled Mr. Hill without even realizing it. Compared to other things I'd seen her do, it had actually been a pretty weak show of compulsion. No one had noticed. Well, almost no one. Look, Lissa said uneasily, I seriously have no idea what you're talking about. I need to go to bed. Jessie's face grew excited. No, it's okay. We think it's cool. We want to help you. Or actually, we want you to help us. I can't believe I never noticed it before. You're really good at it, and we need you to show us. Plus, none of the other Mana chapters has a Dragomir. We'd be the first to have every royal family represented. She sighed. If I could use compulsion, I'd make you guys go away. I told you, I'm not interested. But we need you, exclaimed Ralph. Jessie shot him a sharp look and then turned his smile back on Lissa. I had this weird feeling he might actually be trying to compel her, but it had absolutely no effect on her, or me since I was watching through her eyes. It's not just about you helping us. There are groups of Mana at every school, said Jessie. He was leaning close and suddenly he didn't look very friendly anymore. Its members are all over the world. Be a part of it, and you'll have the connections to do whatever you want with your life. And if we can all learn to work compulsion, we can stop the Moroi government from doing stupid things. We can make sure the Queen and everyone else make the right decision. Everything about this is good for you. I'm doing fine on my own. Thanks, she said, stepping back. And I'm not really sure you know what's best for the Moroi. Fine? With your Strigoi boyfriend and slutty wannabe guardian? Exclaimed Ralph. He spoke loudly enough to get Eddie's attention, and Eddie did not look happy. Be quiet, Jessie told him angrily. He turned to Lissa. He shouldn't have said that, but he's kind of right. Your family's reputation is all on you, and the way you're going, no one's taking you seriously. The Queen's already trying to keep you in line and get you away from Ozera. You're going to crash and burn. Lissa was growing angrier and angrier. You have no idea what you're talking about, and, she frowned, what do you mean she's trying to get me away from Christian? She wants to marry... Ralph started to speak, but Jessie immediately cut him off. That's exactly what I'm talking about, said Jessie. We know all sorts of things that could affect you and help you. You and Christian. I had a feeling that Ralph had been about to mention the Queen's plans to marry Lissa off to Adrian. I was puzzling out how he would know about that until I recalled again that Ralph was related to the Vodas. Princess Voda was the Queen's advisor and best friend. She knew all of the Queen's plans and had probably told Ralph. His relationship to her must have been closer than I'd realized. Tell me, Lissa demanded. The thought of using compulsion on him actually crossed her mind, but she dismissed it. She wouldn't lower herself to that. What do you know about Christian? No free information, said Jessie. Come to a meeting, and we'll tell you everything. Whatever. I'm not interested in your elitist connections, and I don't know anything about compulsion. Despite her words, she was insanely curious about what he knew. She started to turn away, but Jessie grabbed her arm. Damn it, you have to. Lissa's going to bed now, said Eddie. He'd shot over as soon as Jessie touched her. Remove your hand, or I'll do it for you. Jessie glared at Eddie. Like most Moroi-Dampier matchups, Jessie had height, and Eddie had muscle. Of course, Jessie had Ralph's bulk, too, but it wouldn't matter. Everyone there knew who would win if Eddie went up against them. The beauty of it was that Eddie probably wouldn't even get in trouble if he claimed he'd done it to save Lissa from harassment. Jessie and Ralph slowly backed off. "We need you," said Jessie. "You're the only one. Think about it." When they were gone, Eddie asked, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, thanks. God, that was so weird." They moved toward the stairs. "What was it about?" "They're obsessed with this royal society or something, and want me to join so they can have every royal family in it. They were kind of fanatic about it." Eddie knew about Spirit, but she wasn't comfortable reminding him what a badass she was with compulsion. He opened the door for her. "Well, they can annoy you all they want, but they can't make you join something you don't want to." "Yeah, I suppose." Part of her still wondered what they knew about Christian, or if it had been a bluff. "I just hope they don't get too annoying." "Don't worry," he told her, his voice hard. "I'll make sure they don't." I slipped back into my body and opened the door to my own dorm. Halfway up the stairs, I discovered I was smiling. I certainly didn't want Jessie and Ralph bothering Lissa, but if it came down to Eddie having to rough them up, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing them get a little payback for what they'd done to others. Chapter 22. Deirdre, the counselor, must not have had much of a life, because she scheduled our next appointment on a Sunday. I wasn't thrilled about it, seeing as it wasn't just my day off. It was also the day my friends had off. Orders were orders, however, so I grudgingly showed up. "You're wrong," I told her as soon as I sat down. We hadn't really addressed the questions from my first session yet. We'd spent our last couple of times talking about my mother and what I thought of the field experience. "What about?" she asked. She wore a sleeveless floral dress that seemed too cold for a day like today. It also bore an eerie resemblance to the nature photographs that hung around the office. "About the guy. I don't just like him because I can't have him. I like him because, well, because he's him. I've proven it to myself." "Proven it how?" "It's a long story," I said evasively. I didn't really want to get into the details of my Adrian compulsion experiment. You just have to trust me. "What about the other thing we talked about?" she asked. "What about your feelings about Lissa?" That idea was wrong, too. "Did you prove it to yourself?" "No, but it wasn't the kind of thing I could really test the same way." "Then how can you be sure?" she asked. "Because I am." That was the best answer she was going to get. "How have things been with her recently?" "Recently, how?" "Have you spent a lot of time together? Kept up with what she's been doing?" "Sure, kind of. I don't see her as much. She's doing the same thing as usual, though, hanging out with Christian, acing every test. Oh, and she's practically got Lehigh's website memorized." "Lehi?" I explained the Queen's offer to Deirdre. "She won't even be there until fall, but Liz is already looking at all her classes and trying to figure out what she wants to major in." "What about you?" "What about me?" "What will you do while she attends classes?" "I'll go with her. That's what usually happens if a Moroi has a guardian close to her age. They'll probably enroll me, too." "You'll take the same classes she does?" "Yep." "Are there classes you'd rather take instead?" "How do I know? She hasn't even picked the one she's going to take, so I don't know if I want to take them or not. But it doesn't matter. I have to go with her." "And you don't have a problem with that?" My temper was starting to prickle. This was exactly what I hadn't wanted to talk about. "No," I said tightly. I knew Deirdre wanted me to elaborate, but I refused to. We held each other's eyes for a few moments, almost like we were challenging the other to look away. Or maybe I was reading too much into it. She glanced down at the mysterious notepad she always held and flipped through a couple of pages. I noticed that her nails were perfectly shaped and painted red. The polish on mine had started to chip. "Would you rather not talk about Lissa today?" she asked at last. "We can talk about whatever you think is useful." "What do you think is useful?" Damn it! She was doing the question thing again. I wondered if one of the certificates on her wall gave her some sort of special qualification to do that. "I think it'd be useful if you stopped talking to me like I'm a Moroi. You act like I have choices, like I have the right to be upset about any of this or pick what classes I want to take. I mean, let's say I could choose them. What good would it do? What am I going to do with those classes? Go be a lawyer or marine biologist? There's no point in me having my own schedule. Everything's already decided for me." "And you're okay with that?" It could have been a question, but she said it like a statement of fact. I shrugged. "I'm okay with keeping her safe, and that's what you keep missing here. Every job has bad parts. Do I want to sit through her calculus classes? No, but I have to because the other part is more important. Do you want to listen to angry teenagers try to block your efforts? No, but you have to because the rest of your job is more important." "Actually," she said unexpectedly, "that's my favorite part of the job." I couldn't tell if she was joking or not, but I decided not to pursue it, particularly since she hadn't responded with a question. I sighed. I just hate everyone acting like I'm being forced to be a guardian. "Who's everyone?" "Well, you, and this guy I met at court, this Dampier named Ambrose. He's a blood whore, a guy blood whore." Like that wasn't obvious. I waited to see if she'd react to the term, but she didn't. He made it sound like I was trapped in this life and all that too. But I'm not. This is what I want. I'm good at this. I know how to fight, and I know how to defend others. Have you ever seen a Strigoi? She shook her head. Well, I have. And when I say I want to spend my life protecting Moroi and killing Strigoi, I mean it. Strigoi are evil and need to be wiped out. I'm happy to do that, and if I get to be with my best friend in the process, that's even better. I understand that. But what happens if you want other things? Things you can't have by choosing this lifestyle? I crossed my arms. Same answer as before. There are good and bad sides to everything. We just have to balance them as best we can. I mean, are you going to try to tell me that life isn't that way? That if I can't have everything perfect, then there's something wrong with me? No, of course not, she said, tilting back in her chair. I want you to have a wonderful life. But I can't expect a perfect one. No one can. But what I think is interesting here is how you respond and cope when you have to reconcile these contradictory pieces of your life. When having one thing means you can't have another. Everyone goes through that. I felt like I was repeating myself. Yes, but not everyone sees ghosts as a result of it. It took several heavy seconds for me to finally realize what she was getting at. So wait, you're saying the reason I'm seeing Mason is because I secretly resent Lissa for the things I can't have in my life? What happened to all the trauma I've been through? I thought that was the reason I'm seeing Mason. I think there are a lot of reasons you're seeing Mason, she said, and that's what we're exploring. And yet, I said, we never actually talk about Mason. Deirdre smiled serenely. Don't we? Our session ended. Does she always answer your questions with questions? I asked Lissa later. I was walking with her through the quad, heading toward the Commons for dinner. Afterward, we were going to meet up with the others for a movie. It had been a while since she and I had hung out just by ourselves, and I realized now how much I'd missed it. We don't see the same counselor, she laughed. It'd be a conflict of interest. Well, does yours do that then? Not that I've really noticed. I take it yours does? Yeah. It's actually pretty amazing to watch. Who knew the day would come when we'd be comparing notes on therapy? We both laughed at that. Several moments passed, and then she started to say something. She wanted to tell me about what had happened with Jessie and Ralph, not realizing I already knew. Before she could say anything, though, someone joined us. Dean Barnes. Hey, Rose. A bunch of us are trying to figure out why you're on half-time. Great. I'd known somebody would ask about that sooner or later, and honestly, I was kind of surprised it hadn't happened already. Everyone had been too busy with their own field experiences to give it much thought until now. I had an excuse ready. I've been sick. Dr. Olensky didn't want me going full-time. Really? He asked, staggering a little. I thought they were always talking about how in the real world you didn't get sick days or something like that. Well, this isn't the real world, and Dr. Olensky's word is final. I heard it was because you're a threat to Christian. No, believe me, that's not it. The scent of alcohol radiating off him gave me a convenient way to change the subject. Have you been drinking? Yeah. Shane got some stuff and had a few of us up in his room. Hey! Hey what? I asked. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Like you disapprove. I'm not, I argued. Lissa giggled. You are, actually. Dean put on an offended face. Hey, it's my day off, and even if it is Sunday, that doesn't mean I can't. Something moved beside us. I didn't even hesitate. It was too fast, too covert to be anything friendly, and it was wearing all black. I threw myself between it and Lissa and lashed out at my attacker. In the flurry of activity, I vaguely recognized a guardian who generally taught the elementary novices. Her name was Jane or Joan or something like that. Jean, that was it. She was taller than me, but my fist made contact with her face anyway. She staggered back, and then I noticed another shape coming up beside her. Yori. I leapt over so that she was between him and me. I kicked her in the stomach. She fell toward him, and both stumbled. In that brief moment, I had my practice stake out and aimed for her heart. I hit the mark, and she immediately stepped aside, since she was now technically dead. Yori and I then faced off. Beyond me, I heard a muffled sound that I suspected was Dean fighting his own attacker or attackers. I didn't have time to check yet. I needed to dispatch Yori, which was harder since he was stronger than Jean. He and I circled, both feinting and landing blows. Finally, he made his major move, but I was faster and wiggled out of his grip. I stayed out of his reach just long enough to stake him, too. As soon as he backed away in defeat, I turned toward Dean. Lissa stood off to the side, watching as Dean sparred with his attacker. It was pathetic, to say the least. I'd given Ryan a hard time, but his mistakes were nothing compared to this. Dean's practice stake was on the ground, and his moves were jerky and unsteady. I decided then that he was more of a liability if he stayed in the fight. I threw myself forward and shoved him out of the way, off toward Lissa. I think I might have pushed hard enough to make him fall, but I didn't care. I needed him out of the way. Facing my opponent, I saw Dmitri. It was unexpected. Some little voice in the back of my head said I couldn't fight Dmitri. The rest of me reminded that voice that I'd been doing it for the last 6 months. And besides, he wasn't Dmitri right now. He was my enemy. I sprang toward him with the stake, hoping to catch him by surprise. But Dmitri was hard to catch by surprise. And he was fast. Oh, so fast. It was like he knew what I was going to do before I did it. He halted my attack with a glancing blow to the side of the head. I knew it would hurt later, but my adrenaline was running too strong for me to pay attention to it now. Distantly, I realized some other people had come to watch us. Dmitri and I were celebrities in different ways around here, and our mentoring relationship added to the drama. This was prime-time entertainment. My eyes were only on Dmitri, though. As we tested each other, attacking and blocking, I tried to remember everything he'd taught me. I also tried to remember everything I knew about him. I'd practiced with him for months. I knew him, knew his moves, just like he knew mine. I could anticipate him the same way. Once I started using that knowledge, the fight grew tricky. We were too well matched, both of us too fast. My heart thumped in my chest, and sweat coated my skin. Then Dmitri finally got through. He moved in for an attack, coming at me with the full force of his body. I blocked the worst of it, but he was so strong that I was the one who stumbled from the impact. He didn't waste the opportunity and dragged me to the ground, trying to pin me. Being trapped like that by a strigoi would likely result in the neck being bitten or broken. I couldn't let that happen. So, although he held most of me to the ground, I managed to shove my elbow up and nail him in the face. He flinched, and that was all I needed. I rolled him over and held him down. He fought to push me off, and I pushed right back while also trying to maneuver my stake. He was so strong, though. I was certain I wouldn't be able to hold him. Then, just as I thought I'd lose my hold, I got a grip on the stake, and like that, the stake came down over his heart. It was done. Behind me, people were clapping, but all I noticed was Dmitri. Our gazes were locked. I was still straddling him, my hands pressed against his chest. Both of us were sweaty and breathing heavily. His eyes looked at me with pride, and a hell of a lot more. He was so close, and my whole body yearned for him, again thinking he was a piece of me I needed in order to be complete. The air between us seemed warm and heady, and I would have given anything in that moment to lie down with him and have his arms wrap around me. His expression showed me that he was thinking the same thing. The fight was finished, but remnants of the adrenaline and animal intensity remained. Then a hand reached down, and Jean helped me stand up. She and Yuri were beaming, as were the spectators who had wandered up. Even Lissa looked impressed. Dean, understandably, looked miserable. I hoped word of my stunning victory would spread around campus, as fast as the recent bad stuff about me had. Probably not. "Well done," said Yuri. "You took down all three of us. That was textbook perfect." Dmitri was on his feet now, too. I looked pointedly at the other two guardians because I was pretty sure if I looked at him, my expression would give everything away. My breathing was still heavy. I hope I didn't hurt any of you," I said. This made all of them laugh. "That's your job," said Jean. "Don't worry about us. We're tough." She glanced at Dmitri. "She got you pretty good with her elbow." Dmitri rubbed his face near his eye, and I hoped I hadn't caused too much damage. "The student surpasses the teacher," he joked. "Or stakes, rather." Yuri was giving Dean a hard look. "Alcohol isn't allowed on campus." "It's Sunday," he exclaimed. "We aren't supposed to be on duty." "There are no rules in the real world," said Jean in a very teacher-like way. "Consider this a pop quiz. You passed it, Rose. Very nice job." "Thanks. Wish I could say the same for my clothes." I was wet and muddy. "I'm going to have to go change, Liz. I'll meet you for dinner." "Okay." Her face was alight. She was so proud of me. She could barely contain it. I could also sense her keeping something secret, and I wondered if there would be a congratulations surprise when I saw her later. I didn't probe too deeply, lest I ruin it. "And you," said Yuri, tugging at Dean's sleeve, "are going to take a walk with us." I met Dimitri's eyes. I wished he could have stuck around and talked. My adrenaline was running high, and I wanted to celebrate. I'd done it. Finally. After all the embarrassment over my fumbles and alleged incompetence, I'd finally proven what I could do. I wanted to start dancing. Dimitri had to go with the others, though, and only a slight nod of his head told me he wished it were otherwise. I sighed and watched them leave, and then I walked back to my dorm, alone. Back in my room, I discovered the situation was worse than I thought. Once I'd stripped off my muddy clothes, I realized I was going to need a shower and a good scrubbing before I was presentable. By the time it was all done, nearly an hour had passed. I'd missed most of dinner. I ran back over to the Commons, wondering why Lissa hadn't sent me any nagging thoughts. She had a tendency to do that when I was running late. Probably she'd decided I deserved a break after my triumph. Thinking about it again, a big grin crept over my face, one that dried up when I headed down the hallway that led to the cafeteria. A big group of people had gathered around something, and I recognized the international sign of a fight. Considering how Jesse's band liked to conduct their beatings in secret, I figured this probably had nothing to do with them. Squeezing through people, I pushed myself forward and peeked over some heads, curious as to who could have drawn such a crowd. It was Adrian and Christian and Eddie, but Eddie was clearly there in a referee role. He was standing between them, trying to keep them away from each other. Manners gone, I shoved aside the last few people in front of me and hurried to Eddie's side. "What the hell's going on?" I demanded. He looked relieved to see me. He might be able to fend off our instructors in combat, but this situation was clearly something he was confused about. "No idea." I looked at the two combatants. Fortunately, no one seemed to have hit anybody. Yet. It also looked as though Christian was the one on the offensive. "How long did you think you could get away with it?" he exclaimed. His eyes were like blue fire. "Did you seriously think everyone would keep buying your act?" Adrian looked laconic as usual, but I could see some anxiety under that lazy smile. He didn't want to be in this situation, and, like Eddie, he wasn't even sure how it had happened. "Honestly," said Adrian in a weary voice, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Can we please just go sit down and discuss this reasonably?" "Sure, of course you'd want that. You're afraid I might do this." Christian held up his hand, and a ball of flame danced over his palm. Even under the fluorescent lights, it glowed bright orange with a deep blue core. There were gasps from the crowd. I'd long since gotten used to the idea of Moroi fighting with magic. Christian, in particular, for the most, it was still a taboo thing. Christian smirked. "What have you got to fight back with? Plants?" "If you're going to start fights for no reason, you should at least do it the old-fashioned way and throw a punch," said Adrian. His voice was light, but he was still uneasy. My guess was that he figured he could do better with hand-to-hand than spirit to fire. "No," interrupted Eddie. "No one's going to set anyone on fire. No one's going to punch anybody. There's been some huge mistake." "What is it?" I demanded. "What happened?" "Your friend there thinks I'm planning to marry Lissa and carry her off into the sunset," said Adrian. He spoke to me, but his eyes never left Christian. "Don't act like it's not true," growled Christian. "I know it is. It's been part of your plan, yours and the Queen's. She's been backing you the whole time, coming back here, the whole studying thing. It was a scam to get Lissa away from me and tied to your family instead." "Do you have any idea how paranoid you sound?" asked Adrian. "My great-aunt has to manage the entire Moroi government. Do you think she really cares about who's dating who in high school? Especially with the state of affairs lately. Look, I am sorry about all the time I've spent with her. We'll find her and figure this out. I really wasn't trying to get between you. There's no conspiracy going on here." "Yes, there is," said Christian. He glanced over at me with a scowl. "Isn't there? Rose knows. Rose has known for a while about this. She even talked to the Queen about it." "That's ridiculous," said Adrian, surprised enough that he too shot me a quick glance. "Right?" "Well," I began, realizing this was getting very ugly very quickly. "Yes and no." "See?" asked Christian triumphantly. The fire flew from his hand, but Eddie and I jumped into motion at the same time. People screamed. Eddie grabbed Christian, forcing the fire to fly high. Meanwhile, I grabbed Adrian and slammed him to the floor. It was a lucky division of labor. I didn't want to think what would have happened if Eddie and I had gone for the same person. "Glad you care," muttered Adrian, wincing as he lifted his head from the floor. "Compel him," I murmured as I helped him up. "We need to sort this out without someone spontaneously combusting." Eddie was trying to restrain Christian from leaping forward. I grabbed a hold of one arm to help. Adrian didn't look thrilled about coming any closer, but he obeyed me nonetheless. Christian tried to jerk free but couldn't fight both Eddie and me. Uneasily, probably afraid of his hair catching on fire, Adrian leaned over Christian and made eye contact. "Christian, stop this. Let's talk." Christian struggled a little against his restraints, but slowly his face went slack and his eyes started to glaze over. "Let's talk about this," repeated Adrian. "Okay," said Christian. There was a collective sigh of disappointment from the crowd. Adrian had used his compulsion smoothly enough that no one suspected. It had looked as though Christian had simply seen reason. As the crowd dispersed, Eddie and I released Christian enough to lead him over to a far corner where we could talk in private. As soon as Adrian broke the gaze, Christian's face filled with fury, and he tried to leap at Adrian. Eddie and I were already holding on. He didn't move. "What did you just do?" exclaimed Christian. Several people down the hall glanced back, no doubt hoping there'd be a fight after all. I shushed loudly in his ear. He flinched. "Ow!" "Be quiet. Something's wrong here, and we need to figure it out before you do something stupid." "What's wrong?" Christian said, glaring at Adrian. "Is that they're trying to break up Lissa and me, and you knew about it, Rose." Adrian glanced at me. "Did you really?" "Yeah, long story." I turned back to Christian. "Look, Adrian didn't have anything to do with this, not intentionally. It was Tatiana's idea, and she hasn't even actually done anything yet. It's just her long-term plan. Hers alone, not his." "Then how did you know about it?" demanded Christian. "Because she told me. She was afraid that I was moving in on Adrian." "Really? Did you defend our love?" Adrian asked. "Be quiet," I said. "What I want to know, Christian, is who told you?" "Ralph," he said, looking uncertain for the first time. "You should have known better than to listen to him," remarked Eddie, face darkening at the name. Except, for once, Ralph was actually telling the truth. Aside from Adrian being in on it, Ralph's related to the Queen's best friend, I explained. "Wonderful," said Christian. He seemed calm enough, so Eddie and I released him. "We've all been played." I looked around, suddenly taken aback by something. "Where's Lissa? Why didn't she stop all of this?" Adrian raised an eyebrow at me. "You tell us. Where is she? She didn't come to dinner." I can't. I frowned. I'd gotten so good at shielding myself when I needed to that long periods of time would go by without me feeling anything from her. This time, I sensed nothing, because there was nothing coming from her. I can't feel her. 3 sets of eyes stared at me. Is she asleep? Asked Eddie. I can tell when she's asleep. This is something different. Slowly, I gained a sense of where she was. She'd been blocking me out on purpose, trying to hide from me, but I'd found her as I always did. There she is. She was... Oh, God! My scream rang down the hall, echoing Lys's own screams as, far away, pain shot through her. Chapter 23. Others in the hall stopped and stared. I felt like I had just been hit in the face, only it hadn't been my face. It had been Lys's. I shifted into her mind and became instantly aware of her surroundings and everything happening to her, like the next time rocks flew up from the ground and slammed into her cheeks. They were guided by a freshman I didn't know anything about, save that he was a Drozdov. The rocks hurt both of us, but I withheld my screaming, this time, and gritted my teeth as I shifted back to the hallway with my friends. Northwest side of campus, between that weird-shaped pond and the fence, I told them. With that, I broke away from them and headed out the door, running as hard as I could toward the part of campus where they were holding Lyssa. I couldn't see all of the people gathered there through her eyes, but I recognized a few. Jesse and Ralph were there, Brandon, Brett, the Drozdov guy, some others. The rocks were still hitting her, still cutting into her face. She didn't scream or cry, though. She just kept telling them over and over to stop while 2 other guys held her between them. Jesse, meanwhile, kept telling her to make them stop. I only half listened to him through her mind. The reasons didn't matter, and I'd already figured it out. They were going to torture her until she agreed to join their group. They must have forced Brandon and the others in the same way. A suffocating feeling suddenly overwhelmed me, and I stumbled, unable to breathe as water smothered my face. Fighting hard, I separated myself from Lyssa. That was happening to her, not me. Someone was torturing her with water now, using it to cut off her air. Whoever it was took their time, alternately filling her face with water, then pulling it back, then repeating. She gasped and sputtered, still asking them to stop when she could. Jesse continued watching with calculating eyes. Don't ask them. Make them. I tried running harder, but I could only go so much faster. They were at one of the farthest points of campus's boundaries. It was a lot of distance to cover, and with every agonizing step, I felt more of Lys's pain and grew angrier and angrier. What kind of guardian could I ever be to her if I couldn't even keep her safe here on campus? And Air User went next, and suddenly it was like she was being tortured by Victor's henchmen all over again. Air was alternately taken from her, leaving her gasping, and then slammed back into her, crushing her face. It was agony, and it brought back all the memories of her capture, all the terror and horror she'd been trying to forget. The Air User stopped, but it was too late. Something snapped inside of her. When Ralph stepped up next to use fire, I was so close that I actually saw it flare up in his hand. But he didn't see me. None of them had been paying attention to their surroundings, and there'd been too much noise from their own spectacle to hear me. I slammed into Ralph before the fire could leave his hand, pulling him to the ground and punching his face in one skilled maneuver. A few of the others, including Jesse, ran to help him and tried to pry me away. At least they tried until they realized who it was. Those who saw my face immediately backed off. Those who didn't quickly learned the hard way when I went after them. I'd taken out 3 fully trained guardians earlier today. A group of spoiled royal Moroi took hardly any effort. It was ironic, too, and a sign of how unwilling some Moroi were to lift a hand in their defense. That while this group had been so eager to use magic to torture Lissa, none of them had actually thought to use it against me. Most of them scattered before I could even lay a hand on them, and I didn't care enough to go after them. I just wanted them away from Lissa. Admittedly, I gave Ralph a few extra punches even after he'd gone down, since I held him responsible for this whole mess. I finally left him alone, lying on the ground and groaning. As I straightened up and looked for Jesse, the other culprit here, I quickly found him. He was the only one left. I ran over to him and then skidded to a halt, confused. He was just standing there, staring into space, mouth hanging open. I looked at him, looked at where he was staring, and then looked back at him. "Spiders," Lissa said. Her voice made me jump. She stood off to the side with wet hair, bruised and cut, but otherwise okay. In the moonlight, her pale features made her look almost as ghostly as Mason. Her eyes never left Jesse as she spoke. "He thinks he's seeing spiders, and that they're crawling on him. What do you think? Should I have gone with snakes?" I looked back at Jesse. The expression on his face sent chills down my spine. It was like he was locked in his own private nightmare. Scarier still was what I felt through the bond. Usually, when Lissa used magic, it felt golden and warm and wonderful. This time it was different. It was black and slimy and thick. "I think you should stop," I said in the distance. I heard people running toward us. "It's all over." "It was an initiation ritual," she said. "Well, kind of. They asked me to join a couple of days ago, and I refused. But they bugged me again today and kept saying they knew something important about Christian and Adrian. It started to get to me, so I finally told them I'd come to one of their sessions, but that I didn't know anything about compulsion. It was an act. I just wanted to know what they knew." She tilted her head, barely at all, but something must have happened to Jesse. His eyes widened further, and he continued to silently scream. Even though I hadn't technically agreed yet, they put me through their initiation ritual. They wanted to know how much I could really do. It's a way to test how strong people are in compulsion. Torture them until they can't stand it, and then, in the heat of it all, people lash out and try to compel the attackers to stop. If the victim manages any sort of compulsion at all, that person's in the group. She regarded Jesse carefully. He seemed to be in his own world, and it was a very, very bad one. "I guess this makes me their president, huh?" "Stop it," I said. The feel of this twisted magic was making me nauseous. She and Adrian had mentioned something like this before, the idea of making people see things that weren't there. They jokingly called it super compulsion, and it was horrible. "This isn't how spirit is supposed to be used. This isn't you. It's wrong." She was breathing heavily, sweat breaking out along her brow. "I can't let go of it," she said. "You can," I said. I touched her arm. "Give it to me." She briefly turned from Jesse and looked at me, astonished, before fixing her gaze back on him. "What? You can't use magic." I focused hard on the bond, on her mind. I couldn't take the magic exactly, but I could take the darkness it brought on. It was what I had been doing for a while now, I realized. Every time I'd worried and wished she'd calm down and fight dark feelings, she had, because I was taking it all from her. I was absorbing it, just as Anna had done for St. Vladimir. It was what Adrian had seen when the darkness jumped from her aura to mine. And this abuse of spirit, using it to maliciously harm another and not for self-defense, was bringing the worst side effects of all in her. It was corrupting and wrong, and I couldn't let her have it. All thoughts of my own madness or rage were completely irrelevant at this moment. No, I agreed. I can't. But you can use me to let it go. Focus on me. Release it all. It's wrong. You don't want it. She stared at me again, eyes wide and desperate. Even without direct eye contact, she was still able to torture Jesse. I both saw and felt the fight she waged. He'd hurt her so much. She wanted him to pay. He had to. And yet, at the same time, she knew I was right. But it was hard. So hard for her to let it go. Suddenly, the burn of that black magic vanished from the bond, along with that sickening sensation. Something hit me like a blast of wind in the face. I staggered backward. I shuddered as a weird sensation twisted in my stomach. It was like sparks, like a coil of electricity burning within me. Then it too was gone. Jesse fell to his knees, free of the nightmare. Lissa sank with visible relief. She was still scared and hurt over what had happened, but she was no longer consumed with that terrible, destructive rage that had driven her to punish Jesse. That urge within her had disappeared. The only problem was, it was in me now. I turned on Jesse, and it was like nothing else existed in the universe except him. He had tried to ruin me in the past. He'd tortured Lissa and hurt so many others. It was unacceptable. I lunged for him. His eyes had only a moment to widen with terror before my fist connected with his face. His head jerked back, and blood spurted from his nose. I heard Lissa scream for me to stop, but I couldn't. He had to pay for what he'd done to her. I grabbed him by the shoulders and threw him hard against the ground. He was yelling now, too, begging for me to stop. He shut up when I hit him again. I felt Lissa's hands clawing at me, trying to pull me off, but she wasn't strong enough. I kept hitting him. There was no sign of the strategic, precise fighting I'd used earlier with him and his friends, or even against Dimitri. This was unfocused and primal. This was me being controlled by the madness I'd taken from Lissa. Then another set of hands ripped me away. These hands were stronger, Dampier hands, backed by muscles earned through years of training. It was Eddie. I struggled against his hold. We were closely matched, but he outweighed me. "Let me go!" I yelled. To my complete and utter horror, Lissa was now kneeling at Jesse's side, studying him with concern. It made no sense. How could she do that, after what he'd done? I saw compassion on her face, and a moment later, the burn of her healing magic lit our bond, and she took away some of the worst of his injuries. "No!" I screamed, straining against Eddie's hold. "You can't!" That was when the other guardians showed up, Dimitri and Celeste in the lead. Christian and Adrian were nowhere in sight. They probably couldn't have kept pace with the others. Organized chaos followed. Those from the society who remained were gathered up and herded off for questioning. Lissa likewise was taken away, led off to get her injuries treated. A part of me that was buried in all the bloodthirsty emotion wanted to go after her, but something else had caught my attention. They were also removing Jesse for medical help. Eddie was still holding on to me, his grip never faltering despite my struggles and pleas. Most of the adults were too busy with the others to notice me, but they noticed when I started shouting again. "You can't let him go! You can't let him go!" "Rose, calm down," said Alberta, her voice mild. How could she not get what was going on? "It's over." "It's not over. Not until I get my hands around his throat and choke the life out of him." Alberta and some of the others seemed to realize that something serious was happening now, but they didn't appear to think it had anything to do with Jesse. They were all giving me the Rose is crazy look I'd come to know so well in the recent days. "Get her out of here," said Alberta. Get her cleaned up and calmed down." She didn't give any more instructions than that, but somehow it was understood that Dmitri would be the one to deal with me. He came over and took me from Eddie. In the brief change of captors, I tried to break away, but Dmitri was too fast and too strong. He grabbed my arm and started pulling me away from the scene. "We can make this easy or difficult," said Dmitri as we walked through the woods. "There's no way I'm letting you go to Jesse. Besides, he's at the med clinic, so you'd never get near him. If you can accept that, I'll release you. If you bolt, you know I'll just restrain you again." I weighed my options. The need to make Jesse suffer was still pounding in my blood, but Dmitri was right. For now. "Okay," I said. He hesitated a moment, perhaps wondering if I was telling the truth, and then let go of my arm. When I didn't run off, I felt him relax, very, very slightly. "Alberta told you to clean me up," I said evenly. "So we're going to the med clinic?" Dmitri scoffed. "Nice try. I'm not letting you near him. We'll get you first aid somewhere else." He led me off at an angle from the attack location toward an area still at the edge of campus. I quickly realized where he was going. It was a cabin. Back when there had been more Guardians on campus, some had actually stayed at these little outposts, providing regular protection for the school's boundaries. They'd long since been abandoned, but this one had been cleaned up when Christian's aunt had visited. She'd preferred hanging out here than in the school's guest housing where other Moroi regarded her as a potential Strigoi. He opened the door. It was dark inside, but I could see well enough to watch him find matches and light a kerosene lantern. It didn't provide a huge amount of light, but it was fine for our eyes. Glancing around, I saw that Tasha really had done a good job with the place. It was clean and almost cozy. The bed made up with a soft quilt and a couple of chairs pulled up to the fireplace. There was even some food, canned and packaged, in the kitchen off to the side of the room. "Sit down," said Dmitri, gesturing to the bed. I did, and in about a minute he had a fire going to warm the place up. Once it was in full blaze, he grabbed a first aid kit and a bottle of water from the counter and walked back over to the bed, dragging a chair so he could sit opposite me. "You have to let me go," I begged. Don't you see? Don't you see how Jesse has to pay? He tortured her. He did horrible things to her." Dmitri wet some gauze and dabbed it to the side of my forehead. It stung, so I apparently had a cut there. "He'll be punished, believe me, and the others." "With what?" I asked bitterly. "Detention? This is as bad as Viktor Dashkov. Nobody does anything around here. People commit crimes and get away with it. He needs to be hurt. They all need to." Dmitri paused his cleaning, giving me a concerned look. "Rose, I know you're upset, but you know we don't punish people like that. It's savage." "Yeah? What's wrong with that? I'd bet it'd stop them from doing it again." I could barely sit there. Every part of my body trembled with fury. "They need to suffer for what they did, and I want to be the one to do it. I want to hurt them all. I want to kill them all." I started to get up, suddenly feeling like I'd explode. His hands were on my shoulders in a flash, shoving me back down. The first aid was long forgotten. His expression was a mixture of both worry and fierceness as he held me down. I fought against him, and his fingers bit in tighter. "Rose, snap out of this." He was yelling now, too. "You don't mean any of it. You've been stressed, and under a lot of pressure. It's making a terrible event that much worse." "Stop it," I shouted back at him. "You're doing it. Just like you always do. You're always so reasonable, no matter how awful things are. What happened to you wanting to kill Victor in prison, huh? Why was that okay, but not this?" because that was an exaggeration. You know it was. But this is something different. There's something wrong with you right now. There's something right with me. I was sizing him up, hoping my words distracted him. If I was fast enough, maybe, just maybe, I could get past him. I'm the only one who wants to do anything around here, and if that's wrong, I'm sorry. You keep wanting me to be some impossible good person, but I'm not. I'm not a saint like you. Neither of us is a saint, he said dryly. Believe me, I don't. I made my move, leaping out and shoving him away. It got him off me, but I didn't get far. I'd barely gotten 2 feet from the bed when he seized me again and pinned me down, this time using the full weight of his body to keep me immobilized. Somehow, I knew I should have realized it was an impossible escape plan, but I couldn't think straight. Let me go! I yelled for the 100th time tonight, trying to free my hands. No, he said, voice hard and almost desperate. Not until you break out of this. This isn't you. There were hot tears in my eyes. It is. Let me go. It's not. It isn't you. It isn't you. There was agony in his voice. You're wrong. It is. My words suddenly dropped off. It isn't you. It was the same thing I'd said to Lissa when I watched, terrified as she used her magic to torture Jessie. I'd stood there, unable to believe what she was doing. She hadn't realized she'd lost control and was on the verge of becoming a monster. And now, looking into Dimitri's eyes, seeing his panic and love, I realized it was happening to me. I was the same as she'd been, so caught up, so blinded by irrational emotions that I didn't even recognize my own actions. It was like I was being controlled by something else. I tried to fight it off, to shake off the feelings burning through me. They were so strong. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let them go. They would take me over completely, just as they'd done to Anna and Miss Carp. Rose, said Dimitri. It was only my name, but it was so powerful, filled with so much. Dimitri had such absolute faith in me, faith in my own strength and goodness. And he had strength too, a strength I could see he wasn't afraid to lend me if I needed it. Deirdre might have been onto something about me resenting Lissa, but she was completely off about Dimitri. What we had was love. We were like 2 halves of a whole, always ready to support the other. Neither of us was perfect, but that didn't matter. With him, I could defeat this rage that filled me. He believed I was stronger than it, and I was. Slowly, I felt that darkness fade away. I stopped fighting him. My body trembled, but it was no longer with fury. It was fear. Dimitri immediately recognized the change and released his hold. Oh my God, I said, voice shaking. His hand touched the side of my face, fingers light on my cheek. Rose, he breathed. Are you okay? I swallowed back more tears. I think so. For now. It's over, he said. He was still touching me, this time brushing the hair from my face. It's over. Everything's all right. I shook my head. No, it's not. You don't understand. It's true. Everything I was worried about Anna, about me taking away Spirit's craziness, it's happening, Dimitri. Lissa lost it out there with Jessie. She was out of control, but I stopped her because I sucked away her anger and put it into myself. And it's horrible. It's like I'm, a puppet. I can't control myself. You're strong, he said. It won't happen again. No, I said. I could hear my voice cracking as I struggled to sit up. It will happen again. I'm going to be like Anna. I'm going to get worse and worse. This time it was bloodlust and hate. I wanted to destroy them. I needed to destroy them. Next time? I don't know. Maybe it'll just be craziness like Miss Carp. Maybe I'm already crazy and that's why I'm seeing Mason. Maybe it'll be depression like Lissa used to get. I'll keep falling and falling into that pit and then I'll be like Anna and kill... No, Dmitri interrupted gently. He moved his face toward mine, our foreheads nearly touching. It won't happen to you. You're too strong. You'll fight it, just like you did this time. I only did because you were here. He wrapped his arms around me, and I buried my face in his chest. I can't do it by myself, I whispered. You can, he said. There was a tremulous note in his voice. You're strong. You're so, so strong. It's why I love you. I squeezed my eyes shut. You shouldn't. I'm going to become something terrible. I might already be something terrible. I thought back to past behaviors, the way I'd been snapping at everyone, the way I'd tried to scare Ryan and Camille. Dmitri pulled away so that he could look me in the eyes. He cupped my face in his hands. You aren't. You won't, he said. I won't let you. No matter what, I won't let you. Emotion filled my body again, but now it wasn't hate or rage or anything like that. It was warm and wonderful and made my heart ache in a good way. I wrapped my arms around his neck, and our lips met. The kiss was pure love, sweet and blissful, with no despair or darkness. Steadily, though, the intensity of our kissing increased. It was still filled with love, but became much more, something hungry and powerful. The electricity that had crackled between us when I'd fought and held him down earlier returned, wrapping around us now. It reminded me of the night we'd been under Victor's lust spell, both of us driven by inner forces we couldn't control. It was like we were starving or drowning, and only the other person could save us. I clung to him, one arm around his neck, while my other hand gripped his back so hard that my nails practically dug in. He laid me back down on the bed, his hands wrapped around my waist, and then one of them slid down the back of my thigh and pulled it up so that it nearly wrapped around him. At the same time, we both pulled back briefly, still oh so close. Everything in the world rested on that moment. We can't, he told me. I know, I agreed. Then his mouth was on mine again, and this time I knew there would be no turning back. There were no walls this time. Our bodies wrapped together as he tried to get my coat off, then his shirt, then my shirt. It really was a lot like when we'd fought out on the quad earlier. That same passion and heat. I think at the end of the day, the instincts that power fighting and sex aren't so different. They all come from an animal side of us. Yet, as more and more clothes came off, it went beyond just animal passion. It was sweet and wonderful at the same time. When I looked into his eyes, I could see without a doubt that he loved me more than anyone else in the world, that I was his salvation, the same way that he was mine. I'd never expected my first time to be in a cabin in the woods, but I realized the place didn't matter. The person did. With someone you loved, you could be anywhere, and it would be incredible. Being in the most luxurious bed in the world wouldn't matter if you were with someone you didn't love. And oh, I loved him. I loved him so much that it hurt, All of our clothes finally ended up in a pile on the floor, but the feel of his skin on mine was more than enough to keep me warm. I couldn't tell where my body ended and his began, and I decided then that was how I always wanted it to be. I didn't want us to ever be apart. I wish I had the words to describe sex, but nothing I can say would really capture how amazing it was. I felt nervous, excited, and about a gazillion other things. Dmitri seemed so wise and skilled and infinitely patient, just like with our combat trainings. Following his lead seemed like a natural thing, but he was also more than willing to let me take control too. We were equals at last, and every touch held power, even the slightest brushing of his fingertips. When it was all over, I lay back against him. My body hurt, yet at the same time it felt amazing, blissful and content. I wished I'd been doing this a long time ago, but I also know it wouldn't have been right until exactly this moment. I rested my head on Dmitri's chest, taking comfort in his warmth. He kissed my forehead and ran his fingers through my hair. "I love you, Rosa." He kissed me again. "I'll always be here for you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." The words were wonderful and dangerous. He shouldn't have said anything like that to me. He shouldn't have been promising he'd protect me, not when he was supposed to dedicate his life to protecting Maroi like Lissa. I couldn't be first in his heart, just like he couldn't be first in mine. That was why I shouldn't have said what I said next. But I did it anyway. "And I won't let anything happen to you," I promised. "I love you." He kissed me again, swallowing off any other words I might have added. We lay together for a while after that, wrapped in each other's arms, not saying much. I could have stayed that way forever, but finally, we knew we had to go. The others would eventually come looking for us to get my report, and if they found us like that, things would almost certainly get ugly. So we got dressed, which wasn't easy since we kept stopping to kiss. Finally, reluctantly, we left the cabin. We held hands, knowing we could only do so for a few brief moments. Once we were closer to the heart of campus, we'd have to go back to business as usual. But for now, everything in the world was golden and wonderful. Every step I took was filled with joy, and the air around us seemed to hum. Questions still spun in my mind, of course. What had just happened? Where had our so-called control gone? For now, I couldn't care. My body was still warm and wanting him, and I suddenly stopped. Another feeling, a very unwelcome one, was steadily creeping over me. It was strange, like faint and fleeting waves of nausea mingled with a prickling against my skin. Dmitri stopped immediately and gave me a puzzled look. A pale, slightly luminescent form materialized in front of us. Mason. He looked the same as ever. Or did he? The usual sadness was there, but I could see something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. Panic? Frustration? I could have almost sworn it was fear, but honestly, what would a ghost have to be afraid of? "What's wrong?" asked Dmitri. "Do you see him?" I whispered. Dmitri followed my gaze. "See who?" Mason. Mason's troubled expression grew darker. I might not have been able to adequately identify it, but I knew it wasn't anything good. The nauseous feeling within me intensified, but somehow I knew it had nothing to do with him. "Rose, we should go back," Dmitri said carefully. He still wasn't on board with me seeing ghosts, but I didn't move. Mason's face was saying something else to me, or trying to. There was something here, something important that I needed to know, but he couldn't communicate it. What? I asked. "What is it?" A look of frustration crossed his face. He pointed off behind me, then dropped his hand. "Tell me," I said, my frustration mirroring his. Dimitri was looking back and forth between me and Mason, though Mason was probably only an empty space to him. I was too fixated on Mason to worry what Dimitri might think. There was something here. Something big. Mason opened his mouth, wanting to speak as in previous times, but still unable to get the words out. Except this time, after several agonizing seconds, he managed it. The words were nearly inaudible. "They're coming." Chapter 24. The whole world was still. At this time of night, there were no birds or anything, but it seemed quieter than usual. Even the wind had fallen silent. Mason looked at me pleadingly. The nausea and prickling increased. Then I knew. "Dimitri," I said urgently, "there are Too late. Dimitri and I saw him at the same time, but Dimitri was closer. Pale face, red eyes, the strigoi swooped toward us, and I could almost imagine he was flying, just like vampire legends used to say. But Dimitri was just as fast and nearly as strong. He had his stake, a real one, not a practice one, in his hand and met the Strigoi's attack. I think the Strigoi had hoped for the element of surprise. They grappled, and for a moment they seemed suspended in time, neither gaining ground on the other. Then Dimitri's hand snaked out, plunging the stake into the Strigoi's heart. The red eyes widened in surprise, and the Strigoi's body crumpled to the ground. Dimitri turned to me to make sure I was all right, and 1,000 silent messages passed between us. He turned away and scanned the woods, peering into the darkness. My nausea had increased. I didn't understand why, but somehow I could sense the Strigoi around us. That was what was making me feel sick. Dimitri turned back to me, and there was a look I'd never seen in his eyes. "Rose, listen to me. Run. Run as fast and as hard as you can back to your dorm. Tell the guardians." I nodded. There was no questioning here. Reaching out, he gripped my upper arm, gaze locked on me to make sure I understood his next words. "Do not stop," he said. "No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not stop. Not until you've warned the others. Don't stop unless you're directly confronted. Do you understand?" I nodded again. He released his hold. "Tell them, Bertia." I nodded again. "Run." I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't ask what he was going to do because I already knew. He was going to stop as many Strigoi as he could so that I could get help. And a moment later, I heard grunts and hits that told me he'd found another. For only a heartbeat, I let myself worry about him. If he died, I was certain I would too. But then I let it go. I couldn't just think about one person, not when hundreds of lives were depending on me. There were Strigoi at our school. It was impossible. It couldn't happen. My feet hit the ground hard, splashing through the slush and mud. Around me, I thought I could hear voices and shapes. Not the ghosts from the airport, but the monsters I'd been dreading for so long. But nothing stopped me. When Dimitri and I had first begun training together, he'd made me run laps every day. I'd complained, but he'd stated over and over again that it was essential. It would make me stronger, he had said. And he'd added, a day would come when I couldn't fight and would have to flee. This was it. The Dampier dorm appeared before me, about half its windows lit. It was near curfew. People were going to bed. I burst in through the doors, feeling like my heart was going to explode from the exertion. The first person I saw was Stan, and nearly knocked him over. He caught my wrists to steady me. "Rose, what—" "Strigoi!" I gasped out. "There are Strigoi on campus!" He stared at me, and for the first time I'd ever seen, his mouth seriously dropped open. Then he recovered himself, and I could immediately see what he was thinking. More ghost stories. "Rose, I don't know what you're—" "I'm not crazy," I screamed. Everyone in the dorm's lobby was staring at us. "They're out there. They're out there, and Dimitri is fighting them alone. You have to help him." What had Dimitri told me? What was that word? Bordia. He said to tell you, Bordia. And like that, Stan was gone. I had never seen any drills for Strigoi attacks, yet the Guardians must have conducted them. Things moved too fast for them not to have. Every Guardian in the dorm, whether they'd been awake or not, was in the lobby in a matter of minutes. Calls were made. I stood in a semicircle with other novices, who watched our elders organize themselves with amazing efficiency. Glancing around, I realized something. There were no other seniors with me. Since it was Sunday night, all of them had returned to the field experience to protect their Moroi. It was oddly relieving. The Moroi dorms had an extra line of defense. At least, the teenage Moroi did. The elementary campus did not. It had its normal Guardian protection, as well as a lot of the same defenses our dorm did, like gratings on all the first-floor windows. Things like that wouldn't keep Strigoi out, but they would slow them down. No one had ever done too much more than that. There'd been no need, not with the wards. Alberta had joined the group and was sending out parties throughout campus. Some were sent to secure buildings. Some were hunting parties, specifically seeking out Strigoi and trying to figure out how many were around. As the Guardians thinned out, I stepped forward. "What should we do?" I asked. Alberta turned to me. Her eyes swept over me and the others standing behind me, ages ranging from 14 to just a little younger than me. Something flashed across her face. Sadness, I thought. "You stay here in the dorm," she said. "No one can leave. The whole campus is under lockdown. Go up to the floors you live on. There are Guardians there organizing you into groups. The Strigoi are less likely to get up there from the outside, if they get in on this floor." She scanned around us, at the door and windows being monitored. She shook her head. "Well, we'll deal with that." "I can help," I told her. "You know I can." I could tell she was about to disagree, but then she changed her mind. To my surprise, she nodded. "Take them upstairs. Watch them." I started to protest being a babysitter, but then she did something really astonishing. She reached inside her coat and handed me a silver stake, a real one. "Go on," she said. "We need them out of the way here." I started to turn away, but then paused. "What does Bordia mean?" "Storm," she said softly. "It's Russian for storm." I led the other novices up the stairs, directing them to their floors. Most were terrified, which was perfectly understandable. A few of them, the older ones in particular, looked like I felt. They wanted to do something, anything to help. And I knew that even though they were a year from graduation, they were still deadly in their way. I pulled a couple of them aside. "Keep them from panicking," I said in a low voice. "And stay on watch. If something happens to the older Guardians, it'll be up to you." Their faces were sober, and they nodded at my directions. They understood perfectly. There were some novices, like Dean, who didn't always grasp the seriousness of our lives, but most did. We grew up fast. I went to the second floor because I figured that was where I'd be most useful. If any Strigoi got past the first floor, this was the next logical target. I showed my stake to the Guardians on duty and told them what Alberta had said. They respected her wishes, but I could tell they didn't want me to be too involved. They directed me down a wing with one small window. Only someone my size or smaller could probably fit through, and I knew that particular section of the building was nearly impossible to climb up, due to its outside shape. But I patrolled it anyway, desperate to know what was going on. How many Strigoi were there? Where were they? I realized then that I had a good way of finding out. Still keeping an eye on my window as best I could, I cleared my mind and slipped into Lissa's head. Lissa was with a group of other Moroi on an upper floor of her dorm, too. The lockdown procedures were undoubtedly the same across campus. There was a bit more tension in this group than with mine, probably due to the fact that even while inexperienced, the novices with me right now had some idea how to fight Strigoi. The Moroi had none. Despite those adamant Moroi political groups wanting to instigate some sort of training sessions, the logistics of that were still being figured out. Eddie was near Lissa. He looked so fierce and so strong, like he could single-handedly take on every Strigoi on campus. I was so glad that he among my classmates was assigned to her. Since I was completely inside her mind now, I got the full force of her feelings. Jessie's torture session seemed meaningless now compared to a Strigoi attack. Unsurprisingly, she was terrified, but most of her fear wasn't for herself. It was for me and Christian. "Rose is fine," a voice nearby said. Lissa glanced over at Adrian. He'd apparently been in the dorm rather than guest housing. He had on his usual lazy face, but I could see fear masked behind his green eyes. "She can take on any Strigoi. Besides, Christian told you she was with Belikov. She's probably safer than we are." Lissa nodded, wanting desperately to believe that. But Christian... Adrian, for all his bravado, suddenly looked away. He wouldn't meet her eyes or offer any conciliatory words. I didn't need to hear the explanation because I read it from Lissa's mind. She and Christian had wanted to meet alone and talk about what had happened to her in the woods. They'd been supposed to sneak out and meet at his lair in the chapel's attic. She hadn't been fast enough and had been caught by curfew just before the attack, meaning she remained in the dorm while Christian was still out there. It was Eddie who offered the words of comfort. "If he's in the chapel, he's fine. He really is the safest of all of us." Strigoi couldn't enter holy ground. "Unless they burn it down," said Lissa. "They used to do that." 400 years ago, said Adrian. "I think they've got easier pickings around here than needing to go all medieval." Lissa flinched at the words, easier pickings. She knew Eddie was right about the chapel, but she couldn't shake the thought that Christian might have been on his way back to the dorm and been caught in the middle. The worry was eating her up, and she felt helpless with no way to do or find out anything. I returned to my own body, standing in the second-floor hallway. Finally, I really and truly grasped what Dimitri had said about the importance of guarding someone who wasn't psychically linked to me. Don't get me wrong, I was still worried about Lissa. I worried more about her than any other Moroi on campus. The only way I wouldn't have been worried would have been if she were miles away, ringed in wards and guardians. But at least I knew she was as safe as she could be right now. That was something. But Christian? I had no idea. I had no link to tell me his whereabouts, or to even let me know if he was alive. This was what Dimitri had meant. It was an entirely different game when you didn't have a bond, and it was a scary one. I stared at the window without seeing it. Christian was out there. He was my charge. And even if the field experience was hypothetical, well, it didn't change things. He was a Moroi. He might be in danger. I was the one who was supposed to guard him. They came first. I took a deep breath and wrestled with the decision before me. I'd been given orders, and guardians followed orders. With the dangers around us, following orders was what kept us organized and efficient. Playing rebel could sometimes get people killed. Mason had proven that in going after the Strigoi in Spokane. But it wasn't like I was the only one who faced danger here. Everyone was at risk. There was no safety, not until all the Strigoi were gone from campus. and I had no clue how many there were. Guarding this window was busy work, meant to keep me out of the way. True, someone could invade the second floor, and I'd be useful then. And true, a Strigoi could try to get in through this window, but that was unlikely. It was too difficult, and, as Adrian had pointed out, they had easier ways to get prey. But I could go through the window. I knew it was wrong, even as I opened the window up. I was exposing myself here, but I had conflicting instincts. Obey orders, protect Moroi. I had to go make sure Christian was okay. Chilly night air blew in. No sounds from outside revealed what was happening. I'd climbed out of my room's window a number of times and had some experience with it. The problem here was that the stone beneath the window was perfectly smooth. There was no handhold. There was a small ledge down by the first floor, but the distance to it was longer than my height, so I couldn't simply slide down. If I could get to that ledge, however, I could walk off to the corner of the building where some scalloped edging would let me climb down easily. I stared at the ledge below. I was going to have to drop down to it. If I fell, I'd probably break my neck. Easy pickings for Strigoi, as Adrian would say. With a quick prayer to whoever was listening, I climbed out of the window, holding onto its sill with both hands and letting my body dangle as close to the lower ledge as I could. I still had 2 more feet between it and me. I counted to 3 and released my hold, dragging my hands along the wall as I dropped. My feet hit the ledge and I started to wobble, but my dampier reflexes kicked in. I regained my balance and stood there, holding the wall. I'd made it. From this point, I easily moved to the corner and climbed down. I hit the ground, barely noticing I'd skinned my hands. The quad around me was silent, though I thought I heard some screams in the distance. If I were a Strigoi, I wouldn't mess with this dorm. They'd get a fight here, and while most Strigoi could probably take out a group of novices at once, there were easier ways. Moroi were less likely to put up a real fight, and anyway, Strigoi preferred their blood to ours. Still, I moved cautiously as I set out toward the chapel. I had the cover of darkness, but Strigoi could see in it even better than I could. I used trees as covers, looking every way I could, wishing I had eyes in the back of my head. Nothing, save more screams in the distance. I realized then that I didn't have that nauseous feeling from earlier. Somehow that feeling was an indicator of nearby Strigoi. I didn't entirely trust it enough to walk off blindly, but it was reassuring to know I had some kind of early alarm system. Halfway to the chapel, I saw someone move out from behind a tree. I spun around, stake in hand, and nearly struck Christian in the heart. "God, what are you doing?" I hissed. "Trying to get back to the dorm," he said. "What's going on? I heard screaming." "There are Strigoi on campus," I said. "What? How?" "I don't know. You have to go back to the chapel. It's safe there." I could see it. We could get there easily. Christian was as reckless as me sometimes, and I almost expected a fight. He didn't give me one. "Okay. Are you going with me?" I started to say I would, and then I felt that nauseous feeling creep over me. "Get down!" I yelled. He dropped to the ground without hesitation. 2 Strigoi were on us. They both moved in on me, knowing I'd be an easy target for their combined strength, and then they could go after Christian. One of them slammed me into a tree. My vision blurred for half a second, but I soon recovered. I shoved back and had the satisfaction of seeing her stagger a little. The other one, a man, reached for me, and I dodged him, slipping out of his grasp. The pair of them reminded me of Isaiah and Elena from Spokane, but I refused to get caught up in memories. Both were taller than me, but the woman was closer to my height. I feinted toward him, and then struck out as fast as I could toward her. My stake bit into her heart. It surprised both of us. My first Strigoi staking. I'd barely pulled the stake out when the other Strigoi backhanded me, snarling. I staggered, but kept my balance as I sized him up. Taller, stronger, just like when I'd fought Dimitri. Probably faster, too. We circled, and then I leapt out and kicked him. He barely budged. He reached for me, and I again managed to dodge as I scanned for some opening to stake him. My narrow escape didn't slow him down, though, and he immediately attacked again. He knocked me to the ground, pinning my arms. I tried to push him off, but he didn't move. Saliva dripped from his fangs as he leaned his face down toward mine. This Strigoi wasn't like Isaiah, wasting time with stupid speeches. This one was going to go in for the kill, draining my blood, and then Christian's. I felt the fangs against my neck, and I knew I was going to die. It was horrible. I wanted to live so badly. But this was how it would end. With my last moments, I started to yell at Christian to run, but then the Strigoi above me suddenly lit up like a torch. He jerked back, and I rolled out from underneath him. Thick flames covered his body, completely obscuring any of his features. He was just a man-shaped bonfire. I heard a few strangled screams before he grew silent. He fell to the ground, twitching and rolling before finally going still. Steam rose from where fire hit the snow, and the flames soon burned out, revealing nothing but ashes underneath. I stared at the charred remains. Only moments ago I'd expected to die. Now my attacker was dead. I nearly reeled from how close I'd been to dying. Life and death were so unpredictable, so close to each other. We existed moment to moment, never knowing who would be next to leave this world. I was still in it, barely, and as I looked up from the ashes, everything around me seemed so sweet and so beautiful. The trees, the stars, the moon. I was alive, and I was glad I was. I turned to Christian, who was crouched on the ground. "Wow," I said, helping him up. Obviously, he was the one who had saved me. "No shit," he said. "Didn't know I had that much power." He peered around, body rigid and tense. "Are there more?" "No," I said. "You seem pretty certain." "Well, this is going to sound weird, but I can kind of sense them. Don't ask how," I said, seeing his mouth open. "Just roll with it. I think it's like the ghost thing, a shadow-kissed side effect. Whatever, let's get back to the chapel." He didn't move. A strange, speculative look was on his face. "Rose, do you really want to hole up in the chapel?" "What do you mean?" "We just took out 2 Strigoi," he said, pointing to the staked and charred bodies. I met his eyes, the full impact of what he was saying hitting me. I could sense Strigoi. He could use his fire on them. I could stake them. Provided we didn't hit a group of 10 or something, we could do some serious damage. Then reality hit. "I can't," I told him slowly. "I can't risk your life." "Rose, you know what we could do. I can see it in your face. It's worth risking 1 Moroi life, and, well, yours, to take out a bunch of Strigoi." Putting a Moroi in danger, taking him out to fight Strigoi, it pretty much went against everything I'd been taught. All of a sudden, I remembered that brief moment of clarity I'd just had. The wonderful joy of being alive. I could save so many others. I had to save them. I would fight as hard as I could. "Don't use your full power on them," I finally said. "You don't need to incinerate them in 10 seconds like that. Just light them up enough to distract them, and then I'll finish them. You can save your power." A grin lit his face. "We're going hunting?" Oh man, I was going to get in so much trouble. But the idea was too appealing, too exciting. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to protect the people I loved. What I really wanted was to go to Lys's door